Hi, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the Youth Advisory Board's Period Stigma and Period Poverty campaign, It's Bloody Normal. I'm your host, Anya, and your moderator for today's panel. And I am also the founder of my own nonprofit called Global Girls Initiative that provides menstrual hygiene products and education to youth and students in underserved communities to end period poverty. I'm a member of Plan USA's Youth Advisory Board, which is a group that brings the youth perspective to Plan USA, which is a global girls' rights organization dedicated to achieving gender equality. So just before we start, I wanted to go a little bit into why period poverty and why period stigma, just because that's what this whole campaign is about and what this webinar is going to be about. So every month, 1.8 billion people menstruate, and over 500 million menstruators struggle to afford period products. And it can definitely be easy to nod this off as an issue only present in distant countries or third world countries. But the truth is that period poverty really is an issue affecting us right here in the US. It could be affecting people in your own community, in your own school, because it really just is prevalent everywhere. 1 in 4 girls in the US miss school because they don't have access to period products, this basic hygiene necessity that so many of us kind of take for granted and don't even think about not having. So a lot of people have to resort to unhygienic alternatives like rags or old t-shirts, which affects both their physical and mental health with increased risk to infection, loss in confidence, missing out on extracurricular activities, all in addition to missing out on their right to an education. So even though this is such a serious issue, like I mentioned before, that's affecting millions of people across the world, why is it that so many of us have never even heard of period poverty? And this all kind of trickles back to the issue of the period stigma and the taboo that surrounds the topic of menstruation. Societal norms in almost every culture around the world has taught us that periods are dirty, they're impure, shameful, and something that we shouldn't speak about. And even in some cultures, menstruating women are banished to a hut outside their homes. And in other cultures, they're not allowed in temples or in religious ceremonies. But when you stop to think about it, periods really just are a completely normal bodily function that represent life and fertility. And it's something that half of the population literally experiences. So why are we so scared to talk about it? And that's kind of the whole purpose that comes behind our campaign, It's Bloody Normal, which is to erase the period stigma in order to end period poverty. Because how can we solve an issue that we don't even feel comfortable talking about? So today's webinar in particular is about intergenerational dialogue and helping us understand how menstruators' experiences and their attitudes towards periods have changed over time. Okay, so today's webinar will start with an incredible intergenerational panel from representatives of 5 different generations to talk about the period stigma. So first, we're going to start off with our panel, and then we're going to go into a Q&A box so you guys can ask any questions for our panelists or in general. And then after the panel concludes, this is where it gets really fun. We're going to teach you how to host your own intergenerational period talk in your community. So now that we've gone over our agenda, let's introduce our lovely panelists. Okay, so first up, we have Vicky Escara, who is a board member of Plan International USA and a board member of the Boston Consulting Group. So Vicky, go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Yes, so thrilled to be a board member of Plan and also thrilled to be a member of the Boston Consulting Group. Before that, I was with Delta Airlines for over 30 years and ran all the operations around the world, except for pilots, and left and was chief marketing officer for the airline. Then I went to work for the mayor of Atlanta for a year, Mayor Shirley Franklin. And then I was the CEO of Feeding America, which is a group that focuses on providing 45 million Americans with enough food to eat. Hard to believe in this country that happens. And then before I came to Boston Consulting, I was the CEO for Opportunity International, which is an international organization that focuses on women that are living in poverty, giving them financial services. So that's a little bit. I have 2 daughters, and I have a boyfriend at this age who, what do you call a boyfriend? I don't know, but you call him a boyfriend, I guess. So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for showing up, Vicky. We were glad to have you. Next, we're going to move on to Nora. She is a Plan USA Youth Leadership Academy alum and the founder of the Burmese Relief Reach. So, Nora, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much for having me here today. So, like Anya said, my name is Nora Mung. I'm 16 years old and I'm from California. I was a Plan USA Youth Leadership Academy alumni, and in that program, I learned a lot about grassroots activism and a lot about how we as youth, especially since we are the future of our entire communities and country, how we can combine our powers together to really act on what we believe in, to see a future that we want. And so through that organization, I created my own grassroots organization called the Burmese Relief Reach, where basically in the country of Myanmar right now, there is a very huge civil war and a lot of different human rights crises that are happening within the country that has resulted in a lot of displaced refugees and a lot of violence as well. And so, due to that issue, a lot of, as you guys will learn later on, probably, one of the main issues that are constantly overlooked in refugee camps are menstrual hygiene and a woman's menstrual health, which is honestly very disheartening because of the amount of women that are in these refugee camps. Like Anya said, so many women are out there are menstruators, but we lack the constant tools and mechanisms that we need to solve our own menstrual problems. And so the Burmese Relief Reach is dedicated to donating menstrual products to these refugee camps. And as of today, I'm super glad to have said that we have been able to ship over 300,000 pads to refugee camps in Thailand and Bangladesh. So, yeah, that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome, Nora. Next, we have Claire Coder, who is the founder and CEO of Go On Flow. So, go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Hello, hello. My name is Claire, founder and CEO of Aunt Flow. Aunt Flow is known for our proprietary free vend tampon and pad dispensers and sanitary and safe disposal hygiene systems. We now have over 47,000 bathrooms stocked with our dispensers and organic cotton period products. Hopefully you can find one near you. And in addition to our business model of ensuring that businesses and schools have access to period products, we have donated over 6 million organic cotton Aunt Flow period products to menstruators in need across the United States. We are so excited to be here, and I'll drop some of my information in the chat for us to stay connected too.
Wonderful to have you here, Claire. Next, we have Nikki Macy, who is the Director of Digital Marketing at Plan USA. So go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Nikki. I'm coming to you from Baltimore, Maryland. I am representing the much venerated and or mocked, depending on how you look at it, Gen X in the TikTok generation. I like to describe myself as first a human, then a woman, then a mother of two beautiful daughters, which is part of a big part of the reason why I love working at Plan USA and advocating for girls' rights, supporting young people across the board. And then last but not least, I am the director for digital marketing and fundraising here at Plan USA. I feel so fortunate to have this job and be able to do a small part in supporting this work and being here today. So I just want to thank everybody for having me.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you all of you for all your amazing introductions. So we're just going to start off today's conversation by just being open and honest about, why it is we feel uncomfortable talking about our periods. So as I mentioned a little bit before, periods have traditionally been a very taboo subject that we're told not to speak about. So now we're just going to get down to why that is. So we're going to start off with Vicky, and I'm going to ask you, do you feel comfortable discussing menstruation openly? And if not, like what have been some barriers that you faced?
So, surprisingly, the older I get, the more comfortable I am speaking about periods and why they're so important to the world. Because without periods, to your point, we wouldn't have life. They're a part of life. And being the mother of two daughters and now a granddaughter, Daisy, who is the love of my life, um, it's really easy to now talk with them and their friends, and my friends find it a little off-putting to not be able to talk freely about these things. But when I was younger, it was a lot more difficult to have these discussions because it was just something that you didn't talk about. So there you go.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I don't know why it is, but we just always grow up with this mentality that it's like not something you should speak about. And you're right, the older you get, the more you're just like, it's normal. Like everyone's going through it. My daughter's going through it. My friends are going through it. Might as well talk about it. So I wanted to pass it over to Claire to tell us her thoughts on this.
Certainly. It's my job to talk about menstruation, but that doesn't mean that it's always easy. Aunt Flo is a for-profit company, and we have raised $17 million in venture capital, which means that I had to pitch a whole bunch of investors this concept that period products outside of the home could be a really big business. And most of the people that I was pitching don't menstruate. And it's also important to remember that although Aunt Flo benefits menstruators, um, not all of the time the people that are responsible for implementing period care in bathrooms menstruate. We're oftentimes pitching facilities managers and heads of operations, and we're helping them understand why this matters and answering some basic questions like, yes, we do need period products outside of the home because although we get our period once a month, we don't exactly know the perfect moment that it's going to happen. And so a lot of my job is inviting folks into the conversation. And if you find yourself being a little bit more nervous talking about menstruation with folks that don't menstruate, at Aunt Flo, we have a term called Flo Bros. We call our guys that support Aunt Flo Flo Bros, and you can welcome them into the conversation. We have a ton of resources for Flo Bros on our website, and I'll drop the link in the chat there as well.
That's awesome. I think it's so important to start including, men in the conversation of menstruation because even though it's not something that they might experience themselves, they definitely know someone that menstruates, and it's important that they know about it. So moving on to our next question, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the school environment and, what did you learn in school about menstruation and how has this influenced your view on periods? And, if you didn't learn everything you wanted to in school, what would you have liked to learn? So I wanted to start off with Nikki with this answer.
So let me first set the scene for you about what I learned in school. I went to high school from 1990 to 1994. During that time, sex education, reproductive education, any kind of education about your body and how people are made, anything remotely sexual was very, very highly politicized. What teachers could and could not say within the context of a classroom. And so, and I apologize because my internet is just taking this moment to be a little bit funky. So, my teacher, we had it as a part of our life science class. It was about 3 weeks in my freshman year. And that's the only time in my entire high school career that in school I was taught anything about menstruation and period. It was a male teacher. I was clearly uncomfortable even saying the word period, saying the word menstruation, describing anything about menstruation. So, I mean, I feel like from the earliest parts of my education in school about periods, I was taught that it's an uncomfortable, icky subject that nobody wants to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Nora, I wanted to ask you the same question, but because you're a little bit more in the whole school realm right now currently, what does your school currently teach you about menstruation? And is there anything you would like to have added to that?
Yeah, so I'm currently going to high school. I'm a sophomore right now. And throughout my entire 10 years in schooling at this point, there's only been about two instances that I can think of where they talked about menstruation. One was in eighth grade during sex ed. So it was around the end of eighth grade. It was 1 week, and they separated the guys and girls into different parts of the classroom. And they just talked about the different, obviously, safe sexual practices and everything like that. But when it came to menstruation, I had a guy science teacher who was giving this presentation. So he didn't feel the most comfortable going over certain aspects, especially in the sex education portion. So he largely went over that portion. And I think the only portion, the thing he said was, well, as we all know, women menstruate. So make sure you practice safely and that there are these different products you can use when you are menstruating. And then the second instance was when I was in fourth grade and my school implemented some period dispensers into the bathrooms. I believe some second graders went in and they started playing with it, and so they took away all of the products inside of it. But my school, instead of responding by teaching the second graders to not do that or teaching them themselves what menstruation is and how it works, they decided to completely just take out the dispensers in themselves. There was about a week where they didn't put anything back in and then they just took it out. And I went back to my elementary a few days ago and they still don't have it in. So I'm very interested with what that situation has occurred to now. So yeah, I feel like there hasn't been too much of a change.
Yeah, that sucks. I feel like when I was going back in, because my nonprofit goes a lot with putting dispensers inside of school bathrooms, that people would tell me that, oh, like when I was in school, they had it. And now I'm like, I don't know a single person that has like period dispensers in their bathroom, which is crazy how we've kind of gone backwards in some aspects. And then also, I wanted to go off of what Nora was saying with, yeah, I don't even think we got like a full like 3 weeks or even like how Nikki did of like something about menstruation. We like got like a 1 hour sex ed talk, and it was like if you don't get pregnant you get your period, and then they like moved on, or like they told you like kind of more biologically kind of what happened, and it was like the uterine lining fills up and then it like comes out, and then it was like that's it, but like nothing very like practical about it in any way that like helped you deal with what it was like to go through a period. So that's really sad, and I feel like we definitely need to change that in the future. But yeah, now we're going to transition into talking about our period experiences. And there are so many factors that, shape our period experiences. And I want to hear about everyone's period experiences, all of our panelists, but also all of you guys in the audience. So please feel free to put it in the chat if you guys are comfortable talking about your period experience. But let's start off with Vicky for our panelists.
So my experience with my periods was horrible in the beginning. I started my first period at 12, and it was in school, and it bled through my uh, pants, and so it was not only was it painful, but it was embarrassing because I had to find my way out of school. My mother came and picked me up. Um, and when I went back a couple of days later, because I was really experiencing a lot of cramping and pain in the very beginning, um, people were looking at me very differently, like what was wrong with you, um, and it that took a while to. It happened every month. Um, that for me and other girls that we were treated differently when we were out of school for a couple of days, unbeknownst to the reason. So those were really, really tough days.
Yeah, and I hope that we can start to fix that now in this generation with trying to
Yeah,
normalize
me too.
that products are available in schools so that you don't have to go out of school because you don't have a period product. But I thank you so much. And I wanted to go on to Nikki and see what your answer is.
I also started my period when I was 12. And interestingly enough, I got my first period. I woke up and my stomach hurt a little bit. I went to the bathroom. I discovered that I had my period. I did know what my period was because my mom had talked to me about it at that point. But I was actually staying with my great grandmother for the summer, and she's in this building, like sort of a senior living building. And so, I wake my great grandmother up and I tell her what's going on. And she was like, sort of, I'm not sure what to do about this. I don't have any period products in the house. I haven't for quite some time. Nobody in the building has any period products. And so she sort of gave me a $5 bill and she tells me to go to the drugstore. And so I walk about a block to the drugstore. I go, I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to get. I'm pretty sure while I was gone, she was frantically calling my mother. And I go into the drugstore. I get what I think is the right product. I got pads. I didn't know what size pads. I didn't know what kind, what kind, and there were a couple different kinds to choose from. So I just grabbed whatever I thought was right. And I go up to the register and I stop it because my little 12-year-old self was so petrified because there was a man at the cash register. And now I have to put a thing of pads on the counter and pay for them. And this man is going to look at me and know that I have my period. And I was trying to think in preparation for this gathering, why exactly that, petrified me so much. I guess it just comes down to when you're 12, any experience with males can be a little bit fraught with trauma just from everything that's going on in your life when you're 12. But I got through it, got home. By that time, my mom had been called. She came. She made a really, really big deal out of it. I remember coming out of the whole thing very confused because she gave me like this sort of circle of life type talk about how I'm a woman now and this means so many things. And I didn't even know what that means. I was like, do I still have a curfew? Can I stay in the house now that I'm a woman? And so, from there on, that was like sort of the beginning of that career. But through my life, it's interesting because there were so many moments where talking about periods could have really saved me a lot of anguish. When I found out I was pregnant with my first daughter, I did not know that exactly how you transition from having a period to not having a period. And sometimes you have a period when you're pregnant, but you don't really. And at a point not so long ago, I ended up having to get treatment for something called uterine fibroid. I had something called uterine fibroid embolization because my periods were super duper heavy and that was affecting my life. And throughout my life, I just didn't know that there were such a range of experiences, symptoms, and things that could happen during your period that are could be in the range of normal. And then, ultimately what qualifies as not normal. And when you talk to your doctor about things that are really affecting your life. So, starting with that experience onward, it wasn't a horrible experience, but it sort of set the tone, like I said, just like with sex education, for the whole thing just being an awkward thing to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now let's move on to Claire and see what your answer is.
Certainly. I won't talk about my first period, but my most impactful period was when I was 18 years old. And the reason that I founded Aunt Flo, I was at an event, started my period unexpectedly in public, just like 86% of women have done. And I went to the bathroom and there was a quarter operated tampon and pad dispenser. And I'm so sorry to hear about all these schools that don't even have anything in it. And I thought, wow, nobody carries quarters. And also, if toilet paper is offered at no cost, why aren't period products? This was back in 2016, and I ended up leaving university to start building what is now known as Aunt Flo. So that one period manifested into a whole company. And just to circle back, Anya, on all these stories of schools now not having period products in the bathrooms, I'm going to drop a link in here too. If you're interested in advocating to bring Aunt Flo period products to your schools, we work with students day in and day out. And we're now proud to stock over 750 schools, and over 500,000 girls now rely on Aunt Flo period products at their schools. So just because you don't see it in your school does not mean that you can't make an impact to bring period care to your school or bring it back to your school if the products have been removed. And that's what we focus on at Aunt Flo.
Lastly, I wanted to bring it to Nora.
Yeah, so my first experience was I was 10 years old and I was at my local masjid or mosque. And basically I was at my Sunday school and during lunch I felt something trickle down and I was like, did I pee my pants? So I went to the bathroom and I looked and I saw blood. Luckily, my sister and my mom had taught me what period was. And so I went to the kitchen where my mom volunteered at. And when I walked in, every single woman teacher that I've ever had was in there. So like there was at least 15 people in that kitchen just like talking with one another. And so I don't know why, but at 10 years old, even in a room with just a bunch of females, maybe it was because they were my teachers, but I also felt very scared to say it in English, so I said it in Burmese. Fortunately, I don't think I've ever said that word before in Burmese, so when I told my mom, she was like very confused on what I was trying to say. But yeah, when she finally got it, she took me to the bathroom and like taught me everything, got me a pad and stuff like that. But I think it's really interesting that I was scared to say it in English because then all my other teachers would have seen and known. So
Um, I think similar to you, I was also kind of taught about my period, like with my mom, like when I got it, she kind of taught me like, oh, this is what you use, like this is what you do. And I kind of had that education in my household. But I know that there's like a lot of people that didn't even get told what a period was. And I can't even imagine the like amount of shock that you could be in if you didn't know what a period was. Honestly, I still remember my mom telling me this story of how when she got her first period, she really thought she was dying. She thought she had some sort of cancer and she started hiding her underwear behind like the bathroom door and didn't tell her mom because she was like, oh my God, they're going to be so sad. They're going to think I'm dying. And it's so sad that she wasn't taught about what a period was and that my grandma wasn't like open to it because they had always been taught that it's something that we shouldn't talk about. Before I open it back up to the panelists, just in case anyone else's like period story jogged a memory and you wanted to contribute anything, I wanted to go a little bit into the comment section of the audience to hear a little bit about what their first period stories was. So Kristen was saying that she got her first period at dance class. She was 11 and she was so confused because it was brown and people didn't tell her that there was different colors other than red. Yeah. So even though we get told, some people get told like the basics of period, we don't get told everything. And you know, seeing brown is probably confusing because that is not what you think period should be. Let's see. Byrony said that I still feel like that 12-year-old girl, even now at 18, I still feel uncomfortable buying period products, asking them when I don't have them, but it's something that I really want to. Okay. Do any of our panelists have anything that they wanted to jog their memory a little bit?
yeah, so I think Anya, you said something about how there was a like you know what a period is, but you don't know too much about it. And that jogged my memory of the first time I had my period and I was going to Taekwondo. So obviously when you do sports, it's very uncomfortable to have a pad because you don't know where the blood is going to go. And so I decided I was going to use a tampon. So I knew that I could use a tampon, but I didn't know how. And the thing is, my mom also didn't know how because in my culture, I believe there's also the stigma around tampons where if you put it in, it'll take your virginity and stuff like that. And so she also never used a tampon in her life, so she couldn't teach me how. And so when I first used a tampon, um, I I took it out of the plastic wrapping, but I also took it out of the plastic applicator as well. So I did not know how that day worked. That was like the only memory I have, but I just remember it was so uncomfortable. I was like kicking and I was running, and I was like, this is really what it feels like. I thought people said like you can't feel any tampons when it goes in. I was like, okay, yeah.
Just to
Thank you.
validate some of these feelings, State of the Period is an annual report that's produced by period.org and Thinks. And the most recent report found that 78% of students believe they were taught more about the biology of frogs than the female body. So just to put the statistics around this, it's not just you. It is 78% of students. And I'll drop in this most recent study from State of the Period. It's really phenomenal and fascinating.
Thank you so much for that.
Oh,
Um,
I was gonna add one more thing. Sorry, but that is that sort of the same way you were about tampons. I swear, I learned so much from my daughters. They are 25 and 22, and I didn't know. I was going on vacation, and I got my bid, and my daughter was just like, "Mom, why don't you just use a menstrual cup?" And I was just like, what the heck is that? I knew what it was, but it was like I had no idea. We did not have menstrual cups when I was younger. I didn't know what it was. So then, I'm sitting there and she actually took me step by step, went with me to buy one, told me how to use it, told me like the range of like, what you might feel while it's in the first time and things like that. So yeah, it can be really awkward trying to approach new products that you've never used before.
But I love how much your daughters know about, newer things like menstrual cups and are able to teach you about it. That's awesome. Anyone have any other comments? Otherwise, we can transition to the next part of our webinar. Okay. So then I wanted to shift to our last and final topic, which is about shaping the future narrative that we want to create around menstruation and periods. So, Nikki, from your point of view, do you think that the stigma around periods is changing?
Say in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. You know, partially because of the times, there's a lot more resources out there for managing your period. I track my period app, whereas, I used to try to do so on a calendar. And I see that there's a lot more talking about it on television and in pop culture and in movies and things like that. One of the things that I did notice lately was I saw a commercial, and I can't remember exactly what company it was. If anybody remembers, holler. But usually, like commercials for period products, they would have like these really weird colored liquids that you would like pour onto like the period product because God forbid we use the color red, which is realistic. And I saw one the other day where that used the color red, and I was like, wow, that's really like, even though, period red has been a color in periods for as long as, anybody's been menstruating, we were just so reluctant to use the color red. So it's like in those respects, I see sort of the conversation opening up. There is still a long way to go, I think. But then some of the, there are also things that discourage me. There's a lot going on about regulating women's bodies, reproductive health, different laws and things that are going on where I feel like the overall conversation and tone about bodies and the function of women's body, normal and what's not normal and what's healthy, dangerous, and getting help and intervention is really, really under threat right now. And that's where that worries me, not specifically. And I feel like, just the whole climate around.
Awesome. Thank you. And then, Claire, I wanted to ask you from your point of view, as someone who has created this awesome period organization, how do you see that periods have been changing and how do you see the stigma around periods changing?
Certainly. I founded Aunt Flo in 2016. In 2016, no US states had legislation around period care. There wasn't even international consistent legislation around period care. And where we are today in 2024 is 25 US states either require or fund schools to offer free period products. In Canada, just up north, all federally regulated employers are required to offer free period products in bathrooms. In Scotland, it's the first country requiring all bathrooms outside of the home to offer free period products. So I am excited to report that today, just 8 years later, we are now having a whole webinar on Menstrual Hygiene Day, talking about something that was not talked about back in 2016 with no legislation and certainly no webinar on Menstrual Hygiene Day. And so I am super optimistic, but our job is not done, right? There's 50 states and only 25 of them have passed legislation to require or offer funding for schools. And there are 10 million female commercial bathrooms in the United States, and Aunt Flo is only stocked in 47,000 of them. And so we have a long way to go, team, but we're certainly making progress.
Yes, for sure. I do definitely think we've come a long way, especially with legislations. And I know the tampon tax has been a big thing about how, we're still being charged sale tax because period products are considered like a luxury good, which, a very basic hygiene necessity that all of us literally need. But we have 21 states left to go with the tampon tax, but quite a bit of them have made progress with abolishing that. Okay, so then to close everything off, I wanted to ask everyone this final question. What would you like to see change for future generations of menstruators? And Nora, we can start with you.
Yeah, so my main thing for the future regarding menstrual hygiene and period poverty is really just it's just an emphasis on learning more and just really trying to combat the stigma, which is literally what this campaign is for. I'm like trying to respond to everyone in the chat that like mentioned me right now, but it's like so true, especially in certain countries like in Southeast Asia. I've like directly experienced how these stigmas and these perceptions, these negative perceptions can really impact a girl's like perspective like on themselves. Like it makes them ashamed of something that is so natural. And it honestly makes them scared in certain aspects as well. So in the future, I want to see an emphasis on breaking the stigma and also really directed with what my work is with the Burmese Relief Reach. I also want to see a lot of um, work with girls in crisis. And I believe this campaign with the Youth Advisory Board and this entire campaign in another webinar will also be talking about menstruation, especially with girls in crises. But yeah, so girls in crises, it's often one of the most often like overlooked aspects in crisis, like women's menstruation. And that's literally half the population. Half of those refugees oftentimes are menstruating. And so it's really disheartening to see all of these different stigmas and all of these different issues that we have, even though it's such a normal thing. And I feel like it could be so solved if we just took a minute to internalize everything and have intelligent conversations and talking about it, making sure that everyone around the world knows about it.
Yeah, this is, menstruation isn't necessarily specific to, a certain country or like a certain group. It really is half the population that menstruates. And this happens in these humanitarian crises. Our next webinar is about periods in humanitarian crises. And I know Judy just dropped the registration for our next webinar in the chat. So if you guys would like to sign up for that, it's on July 25th. So be sure to do that. Um, okay, now I wanted to move on to Claire and see what you thought.
Um, so the simplest no cost thing that we can all do today is when we are on our periods, we stop hiding our tampon or pad or menstrual product up our sleeve as we walk to the bathroom. Everybody can do that. It costs no money, costs nothing. And as we do that, it normalizes and demonstrates to others that, look, this is normal. And if people are uncomfortable by it, one, then they could just start implementing ant flow in their bathrooms, and then people don't have to carry their period products in their hands. And two, like, look, at the end of the day, this is normal. And so that is the low cost, no cost thing that we can do today. I encourage each of you to just carry your period product proudly. In my world, or my vision for the world is that every bathroom outside of the home is stocked with freely accessible period care, as well as safe and hygienic disposal of period care as well. I'm excited to make that world together with all of you.
Okay, moving on to Nikki.
How can I top that? That's such a great suggestion. It's like, and I'm so guilty of that. I um, I, I know that like one of the things that I've personally tried to take on is that I have a team that I supervise here at Plan, and I encourage them to, be open and talk about like if you're not feeling well that day, you don't have to make up some vague excuse if it's because of your period. If you have cramps, we're an all-female team anyway, but it's okay to talk about that. And hopefully, I would hope that that was something that could start to happen or more people feel comfortable being open about. I feel like, in my young adult years, there was this perception that like your period made you completely like emotionally irrational and insane, and you weren't capable of making good decisions when you're on your period because you're just so emotional. I want that kind of thinking to stop and to, really recognize that this is a part of what we live with our bodies. And yes, I am capable of, even if I have a day where I am, feeling, higher hormones, higher emotions, that I am still a sane and rational person capable of going to work, doing business, being a capable human being, and that my period doesn't define like how I conduct myself. But yeah, I really can't top Claire, so I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you for your response. And then we'll move on to Vicky finally.
Did you say Vicky? Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't hear you. So I'm going to take a little bit different position, and that is, obviously Plan advocates for women and girls, and women are sorely behind men in leadership positions. We're half the sky, and we do not and won't for the next 100 years or even more have the same positions that men do. So women and girls understand what it feels like more than more than most men. I shouldn't generalize like that. What it feels like to have periods and to go through all the things we've talked about. So I'm really advocating for getting more women and girls in higher positions. And the only way we can do that, or the best way we can do that, is for women to advocate for other women and girls in those positions.
Sure. And then quickly before we move on to our next session, which is our Q&A, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you guys have any questions for our panelists or about periods in general, to just drop them in the chat and our panelists will be happy to answer. Okay. Let's see. So one of the questions we have is, what are some of the common myths and misconceptions about menstruation that need to be addressed?
I already mentioned this, but I really hope that we can stop the misinformation regarding tampons. So, sorry, is this for everyone to answer? Is like someone dedicated for this question?
No. It's open for anyone to respond.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I really hope we could stop with the misinformation regarding tampons because really, like, tampons can really help you. Like, I'm on the swim team, definitely saved me in a lot of different games. But yeah, I really hope that we can stop thinking that it takes away your virginity and all of these other things that are related to it. So that's my main thing.
I heard,
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, another myth that I love to debunk is oftentimes when we work with schools or organizations, when we're implementing period products in the bathrooms, the number one reaction is, oh, if it's offered for free, people are just going to steal them. And that is factually inaccurate. One, as far as I have seen, there is no black market for tampons and pads. So even if people are taking them, they're not able to sell them anywhere. And so that's component number one. Component number two is that actually doesn't happen. In the first 3 months when we implement a period product program, there is certainly heightened usage. And that's typically because people are really excited. They're like, oh no, this is amazing. I want to try it out. Also, I'm not sure if this is going to be available to me. Maybe I need to take a few more because it might go away. There's a little bit of a hoarding mentality. But once the products are consistently available every single day for students, organizations, nonprofits, et cetera, the products are thoughtfully maintained. And so that's one of my favorite myths to debunk. We have a ton of case studies and research on it. So if you're advocating and you hear that as a piece of feedback, let us know because that is a myth that needs to be debunked.
Yeah, that actually happened to me when I was trying to advocating for menstrual products within my school. And going to my school board to pitch this idea. They were like, well, what if it gets stolen? And I think my response was just like, if you're stealing them, it's like you clearly need them. You're not stealing them. Fun. It's because you need them, which is exactly the point of this whole program in the dispensers. So, okay. Then we have another question, which is, how do you see the role of youth and adults being different in the period?
Well, I'll speak to that, and that is, from my perspective, so much has happened for women and girls, as far as speaking up and speaking out about subjects that I think that they are more comfortable and at ease around speaking about any subject, including this one. And um, I really, and I think mothers and dads set the stage for them advocating for themselves and advocating for these issues. So that's why I think my generation, there was not so much advocating for yourself. But I see this generation as really, really moving the mark forward in many ways.
I'll also add that I think that in whatever aspect of my life, as a parent here at Plan or anywhere else, that my job is to listen at this point. I think listening is a very powerful thing because, as I've shared with my experiences, everything about how I was introduced to the concept of menstruation promoted discomfort with the subject. I feel like the more you listen and the more we talk about it, the more comfortable we become talking about it. But even more so is that people who are younger than me are the ones who are dealing with this right now and have the ability to change the future trajectory. And so, I have my thoughts, my opinions, but really I try to just shut up and listen and support. Because I feel like, it's just such an important thing to be able to support the people who are in it right now and not really impose. I don't want to bring forward like that discomfort that I experienced in the beginning of becoming a menstruator and, throughout my life onto the future. I want things to change. And so in order to change, sometimes, folks in my generation need to follow instead of trying to lead all of the time.
So thank you guys for your responses. Oh, I really like this question. We have one that is, how can I take action to combat period poverty? And I think, Nikki, you should definitely take this one, right?
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, how can I take action to combat period poverty?
So just keep talking about it. Talk with everyone about the issue of period poverty. And I experienced with my work internationally and with Plan that it's certainly severe here, but it's much more severe in places like Africa, where I spent a year. And it's so I think advocating and speaking more openly about the issue is really, really important. And speaking with people around, somebody said, Nikki said, why don't you have period poverties, period products for free? Talking about the what word am I looking for? Talking about the freedom to have products for free is something that I wish all young girls had and women had the opportunity, because let's face it, we live in a world where people do not have the wealth that many of us have. And we should all do our part to ensure that they get what they deserve.
Can I jump in with one more thing that easy thing you can do? You mentioned before, Anya, that we're going to be talking in July about periods and humanitarian crises. And one of the things that we're going to be doing, and an opportunity that we created, or that you guys actually have created, I didn't really have that much to do with it, is that you have the opportunity to start a fundraiser to support girls in humanitarian crisis. I'm going to ask somebody more knowledgeable than me to drop the link to that. If you want to check it out, there's going to be more talk about it at the next webinar. But if you are interested in raising funds for that, please that link, check it out, read about it, and consider starting a fundraiser that will help girls who are living through some of the, some of the hardest imaginable circumstances be able to have access to period products and other things.
I saw Judy just put it in the chat. So if you guys want to start your own fundraiser, anything honestly helps with helping us, helping plan, donate period products to people in humanitarian crisis. So yeah, go check that out. Does anybody else want to add to that question of how to combat period poverty?
I think I could bounce off a little bit of what Nikki said. Less about how to combat it, but really supporting with the fundraisers and ideas of really supporting girls in crisis. I think that if you do ever decide to like fundraise a little bit or just keep on talking about it, no matter what you do, it's like a butterfly effect. It will ripple down and it will create bigger movement. If we all as people just take and say one word ourselves, all together we can create a huge conversation around it. And it's really just that, making sure that every single person can say one little thing about it. Because overall, we can come together to create like this huge different movement. So if you do decide to fundraise, like I said, if you decide to say something, decide to fundraise, decide to donate, like every single dollar, every single cent, every single word you say can potentially reach these girls in crisis situations and will give them something like a pad, even though it might seem small, measly, it can give you something and give them something that really just like comforts them because they know that they can properly take care of the menstrual hygiene and cycle. But yeah, it's just like no matter what you do, it will all come together to create like this big just conversation. And no matter what you do, you will have an impact.
I think, okay, we're gonna move on to our next question, which is how can you host your own intergenerational talk? Nora, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, so if you want to host your own intergenerational talk, I know that the Youth Advisory Board or the YAB girls have actually come together and put together a guide on how to kind of host your own period talk in your community. So there's a bunch of resources, and I think we will post them in the chat. Yeah, right there, where you can just talk more about it, and we can give you a bunch of resources. So I think I'll pass it on to Soha to talk a little bit more about it. Yeah.
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Soha. I'm a Youth Advisory Board member. Um, I just wanted to take a second to say thank you to all of the panelists. This was an amazing conversation. I've never been so excited to talk about periods. I feel like I just wanted to jump in and tell my own story, and there were so many points where I've related, like the cultural context we brought up surrounding pads, and I like the first time I had seen period blood was like I saw period blood in the toilet, and I think someone else mentioned this, but it was I think my sister's, and I saw it and I thought she was like sick, and I kept trying to convince my mom there's something like really wrong, and I was like, no, you're not listening to me, like I think she's dying, like something's wrong. But so yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for creating an environment where we can talk about these things openly. And Byrony, who's another Youth Advisory Board member, and I are going to spend the next 30 or so minutes, maybe less, just going through a facilitator's guide. We'll provide these slides with you, and you can use them to host your own intergenerational period talks. It's just a couple of questions, and we really hope that you can do this in your own community. Find people of different generations. It can be family, it can be friends, mentors, teachers, just to create a safe space where you can have conversations like these. But so we're super excited to share that now. Yeah. I think someone will be sharing the slides temporarily. So perfect. Okay, we'll just get started. So we're just going to share some resources with you. As I mentioned, I know Bryony's not spotlighted right now, but she'll also jump on There she is. I think you can just introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name's Barney. I'm also one of the, excuse me, members that Nora mentioned, and we're just really excited to talk you through this slideshow and talk all about the importance of these conversations within your communities.
Awesome. Okay, we can head to the next slide. Great. So we're just going to start by talking about how you can set some ground rules. I think one of the reasons why this period talk was so successful is that everyone felt comfortable enough to share their own stories. And so we want to emphasize the importance of setting a space very intentionally, picking a time very intentionally, where you know people will be comfortable to talk openly. And you can also mention to participants that they're not obligated to answer every question and that they shouldn't share others' stories outside of this protected space that you have unless it's something you've all agreed to and consented to. One thing that I did want to mention that actually ended up being an important point that we mentioned in our period talk just now was that we understand it can be difficult to have such conversations within your family, especially considering the different cultural and familial contexts. So I just wanted to say that you know your relationships best and you should prioritize your safety and your health above all. So we encourage you to think about that, be very clear in your expectation with those who are participating. And if you don't think that that's a conversation you can have with certain family members, obviously prioritize your well-being, but definitely reach out and see if that is a possibility. Yeah. Next slide, please.
So one of the activities that we recommend that you go through with those who are engaging with your period talk is just kind of getting down the introductions. As we've discussed, and I think as everyone has experienced at some point, periods can be a very sensitive subject, and so it's really important to lay that groundwork. Part of that is obviously introducing yourself, your name and your pronouns. I think an important note here is that menstruation is not exclusively associated with being a woman. I think it's certainly something that we need to be thinking about more broadly. And it's really important to just get that aspect and be open about the pronouns and the identities that are in the room. We also recommend that you ask the following question, which is, what did your school teach you about your period? We found that this is a really great way to sort of enter the conversation. Everyone will have an experience with education, and it really helps to open up on something that everyone can relate to. Though experiences will differ greatly, this really helps to kind of set that founding and to understand who's in the room, who is the audience, and what sort of experiences does everyone have regarding their education. And as we say here, it's great to write that down just so that you can revisit it at a different portion of the talk. We can move on to the next slide.
Okay, perfect. So the structure that our period talk that we've designed will actually follow has these 3 sections. And I think we did a great job of emulating those today. So we start off with normalizing period conversations, move into sharing period experiences, your first period story, and then finally shifting the period narrative, looking towards the future. And so it's up to you how much time you'd like to dedicate to each section. Obviously, we've provided this structure as a guide, and we suggest that you try to cover all bases, but it's flexible to how the conversation flows naturally. And yeah, I think this is a good outline to sort of follow. Next slide, please.
So here are some of the recommended questions that we've given. We put a sort of gentle time marker of 15 minutes to address these questions, but obviously depending on the closeness, the relationships, or the atmosphere at the time, none of these questions or timelines are super important as long as you feel that your conversation is meaningful. As to the questions, we offer some here. The first being, do you feel comfortable discussing menstruation openly? This is just to sort of really get at what is that stigma and how do you experience it in your everyday life. And I think question 2 really adds to that conception of trying to understand where that stigma comes from. Understanding what inputs also allows us to reflect on our own experiences. And I think a really important part of this conversation is considering your own actions and how what you do or what you say contributes just as how other people's actions has contributed to your own experiences of menstruation. We can move on to the next slide.
So the second section will be focused on sharing period experiences. You can begin by asking, what was your first period like? Were you prepared? And then follow into, are there any period moments that you remember? And this can be a section where people often have very visceral memories of these events, or these memories can be very defining, and they come with lots of feelings and perceptions. So as a facilitator, it's sort of your role to promote an empathetic environment and an accepting environment. The point of these period talks is also to be intergenerational. So there'll be a lot of different experiences being shared. But as menstruators, we're all equally qualified to testify to these experiences. So I think being super accepting of that and just demonstrating proper facilitation techniques like actively listening and reciprocating vulnerability will just make it a more productive environment for these period conversations. Next slide, please.
So this section, as the name suggests, is about shifting the period narrative and trying to discuss the future and what's changing. I think we also did such a great job in this webinar of modeling. We obviously have our own experiences, but we should be forward-looking and trying to understand how we can make it a better place, and make periods more accessible and try to reduce the stigma surrounding it. So these two questions really try to get participants to consider what in the world is changing and why is that? But also, how do we want to see that change really enact itself? How do we want the world that we're moving forward to, or the experience of periods, to be for people, for menstruators in the future? And certainly when I did my own intergenerational period talk with my community, these questions are really important to understanding what action do we take away, as much as these conversations are really about connecting, reflecting, and getting to enjoy time with your community. It's also a really great place to create that list of actions and try to create a vision for what you see the future looking like, and to make that positive change that I'm sure many of us in this webinar are interested in making. Next slide.
And so at this point in your period talk, you're kind of going to circle back to the icebreaker that you had written down at the beginning. If you have time, your conversation might just naturally end or lead to a different point, but you can ask, knowing what you know now, what do you wish your school would have taught you about periods? And this would be a great way to close your talk. I do want to mention that we discussed when we were making this slide deck that it's really important to have non-menstruators as part of the conversation, as part of these conversations. And so one thing that when Plan hosted their own intergenerational period talk is that they actually invited non-menstruators to listen, maybe in the last looking forward section, to even provide their own comments. And that is something that as a facilitator, you should be able to gauge, ask consent from the people involved on whether they're comfortable with people hearing their period stories, or where would be the best place to bring non-menstruators in. Is it that last third section, looking forward to the future? So that would be something to consider, because a lot of the stigma, I think Anya mentioned this at the beginning, in cultural context and otherwise, derives from non-menstruating members seeing menstruation as something that's dirty, or even like physically creating a barrier where women have to live outside of the house, or other factors like that. And so I think a big step towards breaking the stigma is involving non-menstruators in the conversation. So that's definitely something to consider. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, I think that was the end of our facilitators guide. This slide deck, as well as a facilitators guide, like written version, will be provided to your emails that you registered to this webinar for. And we hope this was really helpful. We certainly encourage you to host these period talks in your own communities, and we will most likely be sending out follow-up information on how you can connect with Plan, share visuals of these events if everyone consents, take pictures, write reflections. We really want this to become part of a movement, and we welcome any reflections you have on your own experiences. Other questions you can ask that I'm just now seeing towards the end of your period talk are, what advice do you have if we get pushback from your school because they don't want us to host a period talk, or any advice on how you can have this conversation with non-menstruators. So those are all also things you can do to look towards the future. But we're super excited that you joined the webinar, and we'll be sending follow-up information. This campaign, It's Bloody Normal, is going to continue throughout the entire summer. We know that sometimes, as someone who's really interested in making a positive change, it can be difficult to keep that momentum. And so this is a great place to stay connected. Our next topic is transitioning into periods and humanitarian crisis, as you might have heard us mention. And I think the whole point of this flow this way was to open up the space so that we can start taking action and focus on areas where it's most urgent to address the period poverty and provide menstrual products to those in emergency contexts. So I'm really grateful for you all being here, and we'll be providing follow-up information on all of that.
And as always, everything that we provide to you is really just a jumping off point. We, as planned, but also as the YAB, really wanted to center youth voices and wanted that to be a driving force. And so we look forward to seeing the ways that you can create and build off of the things that we've shared today, to hopefully all build a better future.